Hi guys, it's Kelly and I'm back with another video for Honeybee Stamps. Today we are using this English Cottage red rubber stamp, and then I also pulled out the So Special sentiments, but I actually ended up using a sentiment from the butterfly set that I did, All Things New. So because we're using a red rubber stamp in my Misty, I'm going to go ahead and pull that foam out because the foam is built into the stamp. And this is just Nina 80-pound solar white cardstock. You guys know that I love a scene card. And in this case, Dawn Woolsagel has drawn this stamp. And she's got the whole scene right in there for us. Which honestly is great. Because then I was just able to stamp it. And then I just sat and I think the whole thing took me like an hour. But I just sat and colored and listened to an audiobook on tape, and it was a great way to relax. So I am stamping in our no line coloring ink because that is how I'm going to color today's image. You can absolutely stamp it in black and color it that way if you're more comfortable. The technique that we're going to talk about today will work either way. I just think it works a little better if it's no line. And I do like to stamp mine twice because I know that I'm going to go in there with lots of color on top of it. You're not going to be able to see it anyway, but I want to preserve my lines. I want to be able to see them, especially with something so detailed like this. I did also do a little bit of ink blending. So for the sky, I kept like a gap in between the stamp and the ink blending. I don't think you can really tell in the finished piece. And then for the grasses, I just wanted to have this nice kind of soft blend where my grass was going to meet the pathway, where the pathway kind of trails off. I wanted to have a nice soft blend there. And sometimes that can be a little bit challenging to do with alcohol markers. So one of the things that with no line coloring that I have learned over the years of doing it is I really have to go in and put down my shadow lines first, because if I try to go in with my lightest color and kind of fill everything in, I lose any indication of the shadows or the shapes, and it's really, really hard to get back, and everything just ends up looking kind of blobby. So when I do my no line coloring, I do try to go in there first and lay down where my shadows are. Now, I went in with my darkest color to lay down where my shadows are, but you don't have to. You can go in and mark out your shadows with the lightest color. If you're more comfortable with that, that would be totally fine. You just have to go in and kind of mark them out so that way we don't lose the shape. Because it's really challenging to get it back once you do that. So I'm doing kind of like I don't want to call it a dirty white, but that's really what it is. It's kind of like an off-white colored cottage. And so I'm using some warm grays to do that. And then once I have all my shadows marked out, I'll go in with my mid-tone, which for me is a W3. And then I'm going to go over the darker lines that I have on there, the darker shadow lines. And I'm also going to just extend those out a little bit to get those to blend a little bit nicer. And then in some areas, like with the windows and stuff, I may use this color to do the shadows on the left-hand side of the windows. I also used it to do the shadows underneath the floral vines that are growing on the side of the cottage. These are marking out the lines, and obviously they're going to have some if you have a window on the side of a house, it's going to have some shadows and things like that underneath it, but maybe they just aren't going to be as dark as the underneath of the window would be. So I use my mid-tone to kind of fill in those. And then this is my lightest color, so I'm going to go right over top of all of the color that I've already put down to blend them, because again, alcohol markers blend in the fibers of the paper, so we have to have enough moisture down there for them to blend. And then again, I will extend them out a little bit. So in certain cases, like here between this kind of picture window and the the greenery, there's not a lot of real estate. So a lot of this gets totally filled in with our lightest color, which is fine. And right now, like, it looks a little bit crazy. I totally understand that. And I know probably from your vantage point, it's a little bit harder to see the lines because we're on camera, but I can still see them. So we're just going to go item by item, kind of blocking them in. But the technique that we are going to use so much of today that we're going to talk about is stippling. Now, if you guys have followed my videos for a long time, you know that I do use this quite a bit in my cards to create texture for different things. But it's going to be a huge, huge lifesaver for us in this type of imagery. So we're going to be doing a lot of that today. So the door is kind of drawn, like, so it's sitting, you know, it's sat back in like a little alcove. So we want to definitely make sure we're adding some shadows to that as well. And then the kind of like the streaks are the wood grain that's already drawn in there. I chose to do the woodwork on the cottage in that same brown color. And I'm also going to do the roof in that same color. When we have scenes, and like I say, what the scenes that have quite a bit going on, but it's not that this is just one image. It's just one really beautiful cottage, but there are a lot of elements to it. So, you know, you have the house, you have the windows, you have the greenery growing on the house, you have the greenery in front of the house, you have the stones, the fence, the trees in the background. Like, there's a lot of items. So I do try, when I'm coloring things like this where we have several different things, I do try to limit my color palette. And so repeating these same colors help everything to still feel cohesive instead of feeling really kind of chaotic and crazy. So I just used the same browns and just repeated those throughout. Now, I will tell you, when it comes to the windows, you will notice that my windows are not perfect. They're not. I'm just being honest with you, but it's okay, because the windows, it's like a charming little cottage. If the windows are a little wonky, I don't think anybody is going to notice. And it also, it adds to the charm a little bit. But really, because we do have so much going on in this particular card, I don't think anybody is going to be looking at them and being like, wow, that doesn't look right. There's just too many other things. I chose two lighter blues, a B00 and a B000, to do my windows, because when you're looking at a window, it's really just reflecting what you see outside, reflecting kind of like the sky color. So I did that first, and then I used my lightest brown to go in and do like the crossbars inside the window. Those little details really do help kind of to bring everything together. So you definitely don't want to skip those. And again, even those lines aren't completely straight. Some of them are, a little wonky, a little wider here or there, but I really don't think that it distracts from the overall card. For the roof, there is a peaked section. That's what we're doing here. So I'm adding shadows to the darkest portion of the side. And then I'm also going to add shadows behind what would be the part that sticks out, like the peak of it. And again, as we're going through and doing this, it does look a little bit wild, but stick with it because it will eventually come together. So for the roof, I am, for the most part, you can see I'm just following along with the lines here. But again, I want to stress, this is not perfection. You can see some of my line widths vary. Some of them aren't as straight as others. It's totally okay. And then I'll go in, once I have the horizontal lines done, I'll go in and do the vertical lines. Am I lining them up exactly with the vertical lines? Sometimes, maybe. But it's just, you're giving the overall feeling. And this is one of the things that when I first started with card making, I really struggled with this because I wanted to, like, if I was going to do a house or whatever, like, I was one of those people who was like, I had my ruler out. I wanted my lines to be straight. I wanted everything to be crisp. Like, you think I was an architect. I am not, by the way. And so this is something that I did kind of have to learn, as I practiced, to let some of these things go, because in the overall piece, it really does not matter. The reason that you can tell when you're doing it is because you're the only one who's like nose to the paper looking at every single line. But your recipient, or, you know, whoever happens to be viewing your card, is not doing that. They're just looking at its overall picture. And so because of that, we don't have to be perfection. So then once I added my shadows behind the peak, you can see I, extended those out quite a bit. Then I'm just going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to go right over those lines. And as you can, like, as we get more towards the lighter colors, you can see I'm even more like free with my lines and my blending. I'm not overly worried about it because the overall view will read roof tiles. And that's all we really need. So this is the lightest color, going right over top of all of those and just filling that in. Doing that does help everything blend. Like, using that lightest color to really help you blend things in is quite helpful. Because, as previously stated in multiple videos, as well as this one, like, that's where those colors are going to blend, is with that saturation within the fibers of the paper. So this also has some detail for like some stone trim, which I love. So I did go in and I used some cool grays to add the shadows kind of to the bottom, but I'm doing the same thing that you've seen me do with, with the house, with the windows, with the roof. I am keeping those lines intact. That's what you see me doing. It doesn't look great, but I have to keep those lines intact in order to make it so it's not a blob. So even up here with this chimney, I'm using very light pressure. My marker is barely touching the paper because I do want this to be a lighter kind of grayish brick, but I have to preserve those lines. So just when you're going through and this is the first time that you're, maybe doing some no line coloring, simpler images are easier. But if you're going to tackle something that has a little bit more going on like this, which is totally, it's achievable, guys. You just have to have the right kind of recipe. And it starts with making sure that we keep those lines intact. So with the darkest color, I went in and did the bottom shading and then brought the marker kind of up in between each of the rocks. With my mid-tone, I finished outlining the lines of the top of the rocks. And then I'm going to use a C3 and a C1 to kind of fill those in. And then I'm gonna, you can go in and add other colors, like it's this fun little, cottage with this sweet little kind of, dirt path up to the door. So your trim, your stone isn't gonna be in like perfect condition. So I did go in and add some browns, some warm grays, just to make them a little bit more interesting. And really, if you're going in and preserving your lines with those, like those, not necessarily the shadow color, though that is what I use, but if you're, going in before applying a ton of color and really preserving those lines, then Dawn, who illustrated this, is really going to do all the work for you. Once you get those in there, those kind of like ley lines are going to be what allows you to keep the shape. And then I think you'll be really, really surprised at how well your no line coloring comes in. And it took me a long time to learn that is something that I needed to do, because my when I normally colored something, I kind of wanted to start with my lightest color, fill everything in, and then build out from there, just like I had learned to color when I was young. But for this particular type of coloring, for no line coloring, that's actually to your detriment. So we don't want to do that. We want to preserve the lines that are there, not erase them by filling everything in right away. So you can see my little dirt path, we're adding a couple of different grays, a couple of different browns, and then once again, we're going to use those lightest colors to help kind of soften everything and blend them out. So I know we're like halfway through this video and you're like, Kelly, you said we were going to talk about stippling, but we haven't used any stippling yet. And I realize that. But as we progress into it, we will use a considerable amount of stippling. So for the picket fence, you could do this any color you wanted. I wanted mine to be white, so I'm just going to go in and put in the shadows. And for me, that was a C3 and a C1. I'm not overly concerned about preserving any white area because I know I'm going to go back in there with my white gel pen. So now here we are to the stippling. So this house is kind of set back and it has lots of foliage, lots of florals. And we are going to use stippling to create this look of florals without... Because if there was a bunch of flowers growing on the side of a house, right, and you were standing at the bottom of the driveway, you're not going to see every individual petal. You're just going to see kind of the overall picture, which is what stippling allows us to do. So I am starting with the pink, because it's the color I'm going to have the least of. I know it looks like we have a ton of it right now, but by the time it's done, it will definitely be more green than pink. And I do start with my darkest color and then, kind of work out to my lightest. I sometimes add softer, like pink dots, but oftentimes what I'm doing is I'm just kind of going over the colors that are already there because they are transparent. Lighter colors will lift darker colors and it allows us to get this variety of shades. So once I have my base color down, which in this case is pink, then I'm going to go in and I'm going to do more dots. And again, we're not putting down a ton of pressure. We're not creating a large dot. This is a small dot. And I am just going to work in between the pinks. Sometimes they're going to fall on top of the pinks. That's okay because in nature, like you would have leaves that would be over or under, your flowers. And so that's kind of the general look we're trying to create. So I start with my darkest color because it helps me to fill up the drawn lines that are there, the ones that Dawn kind of already has laid out for us. And then with the lighter colors, I'm still going to be filling in the middles, like I have been, like I did with the pinks. But the lighter colors kind of help with the edges to... it just kind of softens the edge so there isn't like this hard line. And now you can see we're almost out to the lightest color here, and we can really see how, this does give the appearance of, some roses or, things that are kind of like trekked themselves up around this cottage. Now, there is a considerable amount, like I said, of foliage underneath it, but I'm going to go down here and we're going to talk about the difference in the lines, or in the dots, difference in the dots for the stippling. So see how these are much smaller, but I'm also giving them a much different shape. So I am still doing a series of dots, but this time I'm intentionally doing it in an elongated triangle shape. And this is going to help give these flowers a different look than the flowers that are, trailing up the side of the cottage. These are going to look more like, lavender or hyacinths or, because we're able to put those dots in, in a certain formation to create a little bit of a shape. Now, I'm still going to need the darker color, lighter colors, to kind of give us that variety of color. But doing this and putting them into a specific formation definitely gives them more detail than what we're seeing up closer to the house. Because remember, now we're standing at the back of this little pathway. And so if we're standing right there, these flowers are going to be closer to us and they would have more detail. So I am also using my lighter midtone to kind of create the illusion, I guess, of some flowers that are a bit more buried. So they're not as dark as the other ones. And I'm putting them a little bit closer to the ground where I know my greenery is going to be a little bit heavier. But again, I'm going to still use all 4 colors. So now I went ahead and I already put some pink in there over on the right-hand side. And then this, I'm going to do just like a little shrub. So instead of doing just a straight stippling, I am doing more of a side stippling. So it's not so much a round dot as it is kind of an oval. And that's going to create the look that is like more of a shrub. By putting down those leaves. We'll be able to see that maybe a little bit better when we're doing the tree in the back. And then for these ones up close, like we would for sure be seeing the greenery, the leaves, the stems. So I am making sure to be a little bit more particular with those and leaving those a little bit more detailed and less blobby. Like we would see with the greenery that's further away. So I'm switching colors, but the technique doesn't change. So for these 2 blue ones up, what's actually 3 blue ones up by the door, I'm doing the same technique that we did for the ones on the side of the cottage, but I'm just switching colors. So your green, like you don't have to be married to a yellow green. You can do a true green. You could do a blue green. You can do, whatever it is that you would like. And it will still work. So I just switched up the greens because, well, it gets boring if everything's all the same shade. Like we talked about before about not overwhelming our scene, with a bunch of different colors. So it's just crazy chaos, but you do need to have enough variety that it's going to be interesting. So now I'm going to go back in with my other colors. This is the mid-tone, and then I have a lighter color. And again, I am still going to draw in those stems and leaves for the flowers that are up closer to us. But I am still using a variety of, those greens to help kind of break them up, get them to blend together. But I think that this is like stippling was taught to me in art class in like 7th to 8th grade. So it's something that you can also use to add shading, which sometimes I do that when I'm coloring clothing and things, but there's other things you can use it for. But for something like this, where we want to easily create, the illusion of these flowers, stippling is so achievable, and it looks fantastic, and all you have to do is do dots. Like truly, that's it. That's all we're doing. So for the grasses, I'm kind of filling this in around these ones that I put down at the bottom. I'm not overly concerned about it because one's a true green, one's a yellow green. They're all going to work, together. But this does put me in a position where I need to kind of create where my grass starts and my path ends. Now, I made sure to kind of start that a little bit further to the left than I wanted, because then I can use that lightest color to bring it into the pathway and get a softer blend. So it's not like super detailed. Now, the same thing with the plants, like the closer that it is to us, the more of that detailed of the grass blades we're going to see. And then the neater you want it to look, the shorter your blades should be. But I really feel like this is kind of like a cottage on the countryside, that maybe it's a little bit a little bit more rural, and so I don't see like a neatly trimmed lawn when I think of this. My husband would probably shudder at the thought. So here I'm doing more like kind of like blades of grass and things like that, so that you will see more of that detail, but it doesn't look bad without it. You don't have to do this part, I guess is what I'm saying. So if you feel like, well, I don't really like the kind of rugged and wild rural look, then that's totally fine. You could just fill it in just the way that we did and leave it as is. But I like the feel that this gives our card. And again, nothing's gonna change as far as the colors that I'm using. I still am using them to achieve the look that I want. For the pathway, I'm gonna, again, this is more stippling. It's just a little bit more, it's a looser version. And I'm gonna use that. Did you see my fingernail? I don't even know how I did that. Thankfully, it comes off with alcohol. But here, I'm just gonna create some like little rocks or stones and some texture into the pathway, and then blend those out with the warm grays. And this is, again, just something else that you can add to give it a little bit of character. So if you feel like your darkness got a little lost in all of the coloring of the grasses, I went back in with my darkest green color and just kind of bolstered that up. There's 2 shrubs that are left that need to be filled in. And for these ones, I am doing stippling, but I'm not adding any floral colors. I'm just doing them as greenery, and I chose some pretty desaturated blue greens. Here, what I'm doing is I'm using the same desaturated blue greens, but I'm adding it just to the side of the house. And this is going to help us to, remember I told you could use them to do shading. This is going to help us so that the house feels like it's darker on the side and lighter on the front of the house, which is going to give us a different look. Here is more of this kind of side angle stippling. So I'm still doing the dots. It's just more oval shaped because of how I'm holding my brush. And that's what's going to give us like the tree foliage up there. And so there are lines drawn in, and I'm following those lines still that Dawn has given me. I'm just putting in my shadow colors like right up against those lines so that it's going to look like there is a healthy amount of darks and lights for our foliage. And then once I have my darks in, I'm going to continue doing those side oval dots. And I'm just going to go right over top of the darks and then extend them out. You do want to make sure you're leaving some white areas for breaks of sky peeking through, especially closer to the tops of the trees. But again, here we are we're not even really like coloring. There's no detail here. It's all kind of like these little dots that we're doing, which honestly, maybe more challenging for some of you if you have a hard time letting go of that control. As I told you, it took me a long time to be able to let it go and look at the picture in its entirety instead of just looking at it right up close as what I was doing. So there is like a little, I don't know, like a little grassy kind of area drawn into the stamp on the like on the left-hand side. And so I just used the yellow greens to kind of fill that in. There's just like a line or two that kind of indicates maybe there might be some hills or grasses back there. So I just went ahead and filled that in with the yellow greens we already had. We didn't even have story. Like I just talked about this scene card the entirety of the time for this video. If you're watching this video and you're like, oh, I really like the way she teaches, please understand that all of my other videos have chatting in it. Like, this one just happened to be what it was. So here, remember how we put the darker colors on the side of the house to make it appear as if the front was lighter? This is another way that we're going to do that. We're going to go in with our white gel pen. We're going to add some highlights to the chimney, to that peak of the roof where, you know, it would be sticking out. I'm adding some to the windows as well because, you know, there would be areas that the light was reflected that would be just like kind of pure white. But more stippling. Oh, and this is how I'm going to do like that sketchy kind of look for my white picket fence. And I'm not going to put full pressure. I'm going to let the pen skip. But we're going to do more stippling. And this time we're going to do a series of gel pen dots, not not a ton, just some. And I am doing them on the front of the house, which again will give the appearance of it being lighter and catching more light. So the flowers that are growing up the side of the cottage on the side of the house, no white dots, darker greens. The ones that are on the front of the house, white dots and lighter greens. I'm also doing the white dots on the foliage, like the flower shrubs and stuff that are in the front of the house, the little rock areas, and then these two kind of, I'm just going to call them hyacinths, down at the base of the path. This is completely one layer. So for the sentiment, I thought, well, I would just stamp it in like kind of the top left corner because I have some room there. You could also go in the bottom right hand corner. You have some room there as well. And I just went with a brown, and it says wishing you joy and beauty. And like I said, it's from the All Things New set. My neighbors are actually moving. And so I think that I will end up using this to wish them well on their next adventure. But this is the whole card. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope that you are inspired to give stippling a try in your projects. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.